Mind you, I'd never been to the continent at this point, but I was like, I don't know if y'all can tell in the story, but I just get up and I show up and I go, right? I didn't allow fear to hold me back. I just, whatever God showed me that day, okay, let's go, let's do it.
Yeah, and you are the time of my life. Amaru, yeah.
I am being called to radical vulnerability in real time in this season. So much has happened to me over the years and in life, and I feel like I've just been dealing with it in silence. I'm Tori Elizabeth. I'm a wife, an entrepreneur, and a multi hyphenate creator. I have been a celebrity wardrobe stylist. I've worked in corporate sales. I've been a founder of a community called the Color Girl, a creator of the number one luxury retreat called the Amara Retreat, amongst other things. And now I am building a community called the 29th for Couples, focused solely on travel and connection. And I'm telling you this not to tell you who I am, but to just give you some background on the things that I've done. And it'll be relevant in what I'm talking about today. A lot of my successes, to be honest, is largely because of my obedience to God. Me listening to Him when He says move, me being still when He says be still. And a lot of my lessons have been from when I've been disobedient, if I'm being honest. And so I want to just kind of talk to you about my story and the things that I've gone through, where obedience has led to great success and how disobedience has led to a lot of heartbreak, heartache, and therapy. So, to give you context, I am from Houston, Texas. I grew up in a two-bedroom, two-bath trailer with my mom and my older brother. My father was present, but from a distance. He was actually banned from the United States. And so a lot of my relationship with him was when I would travel to the Cayman Islands, which is where he's from, and would spend time with him in the summers until his girlfriend at the time decided to cut off all my hair, relax my hair, and then I didn't go back. I probably was 9 or 10, and then I didn't go back again until I was like 16, 17 with my mom. Um, so majority of my life was me being raised by a single mother. So the area in which I grew up in Houston was on the northeast side. It was a very poor neighborhood. 90% was Mexican, and there just wasn't a lot of diversity in the schools that I went to growing up, um, and not that many opportunities as well. Nevertheless, regardless of how I grew up or where I came from, there always was something inside of me that just wanted more. I always wanted to see the world. I always just wanted something different. I was always that person who would push the boundaries. I was always the one who would challenge societal norms. I wasn't somebody who just settled for what someone told me was the way we're supposed to live life. From a societal standpoint, that's probably seen as like being rebellious, but from like God's standpoint, I was operating in obedience. Fast forward, going into college, I attended Texas A&M University, not because I wanted to, it was because they provided the most financial support. And the entire time I was there, I was just taking classes, trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. Deep down inside, I knew I wanted to do something creative. I wanted to do something in the arts. But of course, back then, that was not seen as a viable career and that you would just be broke and living on the streets. Well, as I was just taking these classes, it was the summer before my junior year, my advisor let me know that I needed to declare a major and that I had missed every deadline except for an English major. And then she also advised that I should do a teaching track because typically people who do English become teachers. Well, if you know me, and for those of you who are getting to know me, I am not a kids person. And me being a teacher probably doesn't make sense for myself or for the students. But nevertheless, I moved forward with English, and it was, I believe, the fall semester in my senior year. I had to shadow teachers just to, learn the role in order to be an effective teacher. So I went to a high school in the area. I believe it was in Bryan, Texas, or closer to Prairie View, actually. So for those of you who know Texas, you probably know where that's at. So I'm at this high school, and the little boys are trying to talk to me because, mind you, I'm not that far in age at the time from them. So they're trying to date me. No one's taking me seriously. And I just left that day knowing that this could not be my career, that I could not do this, primarily because I would end up in jail, if I'm being honest. I am not a kids person at all. So I left that day and I began researching other universities, other programs that I could join. And I found that the University of Houston had a sales program, which was the number one sales program at the time, and it still may be, called the Program for Excellence in Selling. In order to get into this program, you have to be a student at the university. And then I believe after a year, you can then apply to be a part of the program. So literally, the January, which should have been my the last semester of my senior year before graduating, I transferred to the University of Houston, also known as U of H. And I decided to just shift. And of course, people were like, "You're crazy. Why would you do that? Just finish. You're like at the end, just graduate." But I knew that I needed to do something that felt more like I had control over my life, more control over my career. And then I also wanted to graduate knowing that I would have a job that I was making money and doing well. And so that's what I decided to do. So after a year being at U of H, I got accepted into the program. And then once I graduated, which was 2.5 years later. So mind you, I went to Texas A&M for 4 years, and then I added 2.5 more years. So that's 6.5 years of college. But it was all worth it because I was able to graduate. I have 4 job offers, all offering over 6 figures. And I was able to be in a career that I enjoyed. I like sales. The night of my graduation, one of my friends invited me over to one of her friends' house for a pool party. I get there, and without my knowledge, we were at Patrick Beverley's house. He, at the time, played for the Rockets. Now I think he might be with the Milwaukee Bucks, but he's an NBA player. So I went to his house. It was a bunch of us. We started talking. He was like just very excited about the idea that I graduated college. He thought it was so cool. Then my friend started telling him how I also was a stylist. So to let you know, while I was in school, I always worked full time. And when I was in Houston, I worked for Nordstrom. And at Nordstrom, I moved up in the ranks pretty quickly and became a stylist. So while I was a stylist at Nordstrom, I also began to freelance and work for like the wealthy white women in Houston. I also had some NFL players, some of which have won Super Bowls. Um, and I began to just build my portfolio in LA and New York and Houston. And so at that moment when I met Patrick, I had so much experience in styling that he then asked me to be his stylist. So before starting my career, I had about a couple months before training started. So I was his stylist. Mind you, at the time, he wanted me to exclusively work for him. I didn't have any income coming in because we made the agreement that he would pay me at the end of the service as opposed to before. I have learned not to do that. And during that time, I barely could put gas in my car. And I was just at his house every day styling him. And when it came time for him to pay, that did not happen, which left me feeling just very vulnerable, left me feeling as if I did all this work and effort and didn't receive what was agreed upon. And I decided in that moment that I wasn't styling again until it was on my own terms and no one else can control the outcome or my craft. So I just decided to table styling, even though I loved it so dearly. And so then I began my career at 3M, was working in sales. The division I was in was the automotive aftermarket division. So I'm literally, my customer is going to auto body shops and teaching them how to use products. And I was the first Black woman in this division in 3M history at the time to be in this role. And I decided that I would be on the executive track. I was like, okay, I'll just stay here, become an executive, make money, live this life that society tells you to live. And it wasn't until I believe like a year later, it was like April. I was a year into a role, and around April, my grandmother on my mother's side passed away. And there's something about, I think, death or loss that causes you to really reevaluate your life and reevaluate what it is you want to do. And so from that moment, I called my manager and I put my 2 weeks notice in. And I decided that that dream that I had since a little girl to move to New York City, to just go and live and not be afraid, I decided to listen to that and to follow it. And so a girl who I met, her name was Nina. I met her randomly on the street in New York City when I was visiting like one 4th of July. And we just stayed connected. So when I told her, I was like, hey, I want to move to New York, she legit flew down to Houston, got in my car, and we drove 27 hours up to New York with my Yorkie at the time, my flat screen TV, and all my clothes. And we moved me into a place that I hadn't even seen. I just signed the lease. I saw pictures of it, but I hadn't physically seen. Signed the lease, and I moved into a 4-bedroom house. I had 3 male roommates that I never met, and I had a bedroom. And I know to other people this probably sounds crazy, like it sounds like a recipe for disaster, but to me, it just felt like what I was supposed to do, and it felt like it was an opportunity for me to really take the reins of my life. So now I'm in New York, New Jersey. I have no friends. Well, I have my friend who drove down with me. She lives in Harlem at the time. I have a friend who I met on Instagram who later on becomes my business partner. And then there's this guy that I randomly met on Tinder a year prior who I hadn't met in person yet. Um, who, no, actually, I did meet him in person. We had a date. It was horrible. I'll leave that for another. I'll leave that for another video. Um, and there was him. So I had 3 friends, no family, no support system, and 3 months worth of savings. 3 months. So I knew I had to figure this out and figure it out quick. So I'm there. I'm like, I need a job. So because I worked retail at Nordstrom, I was like, let me get a job at Bloomingdale's. At the time, Nordstrom wasn't in New York. So I get a job at Bloomingdale's. It was trash. It was horrible. Like I legit would have negative paychecks because they ran so many sales, and then their commission system, it's weird. Regardless, I made no money. And I was like, okay, this is not gonna work. So I eventually get a corporate job at Canon. Let me rewind. Before getting that job at Canon, God actually planted this idea, this vision for me to create something. And it was in January of 2016. There was this really bad blizzard in New York, New Jersey, and I ended up stranded at my friend's house, the friend that I said lived in Jersey City. So I was stuck there for a couple of days with her and her husband. Granted, they were my friends, so it was cool. And I decided to share with them this vision and this idea that God had given me to create this campaign. And so I told them, I was like, okay, I want to create something. It has to start with myself. And the letters that keep popping up in my head is TCG. And then it's like the C girl. And I was like, I want to call the C like complicated because I felt like a lot of who I am is complex. And so I was like, the complicated girl. But then we started having conversations, and me and my friend asked each other the question of who am I, right? So I started to answer that. I'm like, okay, I'm a woman. Okay, what else? I'm a Black woman. Okay, what does that mean? And then from dissecting the different things that I go through as a Black woman, it helped me to create this vision of creating a campaign that was centered around Black women's identities and what it is that we go through and how we were treated and how we were taught to see ourselves and how our beauty wasn't celebrated. And so in creating this vision of this campaign, it just led to the birth of like celebrating Black women in a way that was like regal, like something you would see in Vogue, and just sharing our story. And so by the end of that conversation, the word colored began to replace the C in the girl. So it became the colored girl. And there was some pushback initially with my friends. They're like, that's such a negative connotation. But to me, I feel like it was an opportunity to take a word that held my people down for so long and just reclaim it and redefine what it meant. And so that's how the colored girl was birthed. So at the time, there was a girl who went to U of H who was living in New York City. She was an assistant beauty editor for Essence at the time. So I reached out to her. She was a friend. And I was like, hey, I have this idea. If I'm able to pull it off, will you show up to set and just write about it? She was like, yeah. So then I had my other friend. He went to Texas Southern University, which was right next door to U of H. And he was kind of dabbling in videography at the time. So I was like, hey, do you mind like capturing the footage for me? He was like, cool, because he lived in New York as well. Then Instagram at the time, you could really reach out and connect and like network with people. It wasn't really what it is today. Like it was easier to kind of like slide in somebody's DMs and, communicate. And so there was this photographer, Island Boy Photography, who I loved his work. And we briefly met at an event or somehow we met. So I was like, hey, will you shoot this concept for me? He was like, absolutely. So then I started DMing random women on Instagram of various shades, body types, different stories, and just saying, like, hey, I'm planning to shoot on this day. Will you be a part of it? Everybody was like, yes. So when I tell you on, I believe like April, it was sometime in April, everybody showed up on set. And I think in total, I maybe spent $100, and that was just to provide like juice, coffee, some breakfast, like lunch. But everybody offered their time for free because they just believed in this vision. And so when we got on set, it was just such synergy. It was just so beautiful. Everybody was just excited to like be there and to be a part of this thing. And it was, I don't want to use the word magical, it was just ordained. So ordained. And so a couple months later, on June 21st, we actually launched the campaign. And we launched it on Essence as well as on essence.com, as well as on Instagram. And I had everyone post at noon. Everyone that was involved, all the models, my friends who were impressed, the videographers, the photographers. So all of us at noon decided to post. That was something I forgot to tell you. So when I went to U of H, my major was actually public relations and my minor was sales. So I literally used textbook PR that I learned in school to be able to come up with the structure of rolling out this campaign. People weren't really launching things back then or doing campaigns in the way that they are now. So yeah, I was just using a formula that I learned with a mix of God, a little bit of creative direction I learned from watching Top Model, like countless, countless seasons of Top Model, and then my styling background. And so, mind you, this was actually my first time styling again since that whole Patrick Beverly incident that happened. And so, this was the first time that I actually decided to do it again, and I did it on my own terms without somebody else's input. And yeah, so let me just go back. So June 21st at noon on Essence as well as on Instagram, we all post. And at the time, the Color Girls social media has zero followers. Like we just started it that day. So we post, I continue on with my day. All of a sudden, it went viral. And this was before things were like really going viral. So it went viral. All of a sudden, we had media hitting us up. We had like Vogue, In Style. Of course, Essence ran it. We just had all these people like hitting us up. And then they were like, oh, will you do an interview? So then we're doing an interview. And I think for Marie Claire, we're doing interviews. Just all these opportunities start to come. But at the last question that everyone asked was, what's next? And that is how I became an accidental entrepreneur 8 years ago. Crazy, right? So a couple months later, decide to create another campaign using the same formula in the same way of telling stories, but we wanted to be inclusive of other women of color. so women that are a part of the BIPOC community. And in doing that, I wanted to make sure there was a representation of all shades, all kind of ethnicities, different stories, different body types. This is really before like the whole inclusivity marketing was happening. And so in doing this, I needed someone who was very deeply melanated, like rich, deep, dark skin. And at this time, I don't know if y'all remember, but in 2016, there was this huge, like, obsession with melanin. So you would look online and people were filtering themselves to be darker than what they really were. So it was so difficult finding someone who actually was that rich, deep, dark skin tone. And so maybe a couple weeks had passed, and finally at like 3 a.m., I'm just searching hashtags on Instagram, like I'm going down rabbit holes. And finally, I found this beautiful melanated woman. She only had about 200 followers and like 5 or 6 photos, right? So I was like, this person is probably a catfish. She doesn't exist. But I was like, okay, God led me to her page for a reason, so let me message her. So I DM'd her and I was like, hey, we're having a photo shoot this weekend. Are you available? She was like, yes. I was like, oh, thank God. So I was praying, please, when she show up, let her look like who she is online. So she showed up on set that weekend, and everyone in the room, our jaws dropped. We could not believe that this beautiful woman from Senegal was just undiscovered and that no one knew who she was. And so immediately I knew that her story needed to be told and the world needed to know who she was. So when we released that campaign, the campaign also went viral, but Kudia Diop, also known as Melanin Goddess, went viral. And in her virality, we noticed that like people were reaching out and wanting to manage her. And so we reached out and we were like, hey, we have no experience doing management, but if you trust us and you're willing to go on this journey with us, we would love to manage you. So she agreed. And so for about 2 to 2.5 years, we were her exclusive managers. We had her placed in campaigns such as L'Oreal. She was in campaigns with Rihanna. We got her multi 6-figure annual or year-long contracts. She had television appearances. We rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Just life-changing experiences. And it was just such an amazing time to see the fruit of like our labor, right? To see that something that we created was able to change someone's lives, to change our lives, to open certain doors, certain opportunities. We were able to work with such large brands, especially in the beauty industry. And it was because the campaigns that we created actually shifted the entire beauty industry. People weren't doing skin toned marketing. People weren't doing the flesh tone brown neutral marketing that you see Skims and Fenty and all these brands doing nowadays. They weren't. What we created a ripple effect and created more inclusivity and more representation and showed these larger brands that they too needed to show up in this way. And we were able to work with some of these brands on their marketing efforts. Yes, there were great opportunities that came, but what we realized was we wanted it more than she wanted it for herself. And so the lack of good work ethic began to reflect poorly on our company. And we realized that the vision to be a talent agency was not what this was intended to be. So although we had amazing times, we decided to cut that part of the business. So we were willing to cut an area in the business that, although it made a lot of money, it wasn't serving us. And even during that time, simultaneously, I actually my lease at my apartment was ending, and I randomly, at this time, I was on Instagram all the time. Although I haven't been on in 9 months now, but back then I was on all the time. So I randomly was searching the internet and this beautiful hotel in Morocco popped up on my feed. And I realized it was Black owned, a Black woman owned it. So I DM'd and just reached out saying, I love your property, would love to connect, however we could support. She immediately responded. The next day we had a phone call. From that phone call, it literally led to her agreeing, she and I agreeing for me to come to Morocco for 1 month to do her marketing, her PR, and social media. And in exchange, I could stay there for a month. Mind you, I'd never been to the continent at this point, but I was like, I don't know if y'all can tell in the story, but I just get up and I show up and I go, right? I didn't allow fear to hold me back. I just, whatever God showed me that day, okay, let's go, let's do it. So, in my plans to grow her marketing and social media, I decided, okay, let me come up with the influencer campaign. This is really before influencers were like hot like that. And there definitely wasn't influencer campaigns happening. So I had a few friends who had like a nice following, and I was like, hey, would you want to come to Morocco if we get a brand to pay for it and sponsor you getting there? Um, and in exchange, we just create some content for them and for the hotel. And they were like, okay, cool. So at the time, there was this girl who popped up in my feed. I never met her, didn't know her, didn't know anything about her. But again, that feeling said, reach out to her. So I reached out and I was like, hey, you don't know me, I don't know you, but do you want to come to Morocco for 2 to 3 weeks and just travel and shoot this campaign with me? And she was like, okay, cool. So that was Ivy Coco. If you guys don't know Ivy Coco, she's like my little sister. She actually was my flower girl in my wedding, but her mother is also Cheryl Lee Ralph, and Ivy is an amazing stylist and just all the things. Check her out. So it's about 4 or 5 of us. We're in Morocco. I'm there a month, and then a few of them are coming like sporadically throughout the weeks. But Ivy actually goes with me from the beginning. So we're there and we're shooting all this content. We're having this beautiful time. But I was having this transformative experience. It was something about being on a continent of Africa that just felt like home. It was something that just shifted who I was. I was no longer the same person that showed up in Marrakesh. I just had this like deep knowing of who I was. And so I remember saying, what would it look like to bring Black women to Marrakesh for a week for a retreat? Mind y'all, I never been to a retreat. I didn't know what a retreat entailed. I just knew that I needed to create this thing. So fast forward 3 months later, 80 women show up to Marrakesh at a Black woman-owned hotel for a week with about 10 speakers. One of those speakers being Bozeman St. John, who was the CMO of Uber at the time, who also, I believe, was the chief marketing officer for Netflix, who is the chief marketing officer at Endeavor, plus such like an influential woman, right? And that week was so powerful. The conversations we had, the transformations people had, just everything that it was beautiful. And that vision came to me from God in a dream prior, and I just woke up and created it. And a lot of the things that have happened, like I said in the beginning, a lot of my successes have been just from listening to God and following the vision. It just has been. But I'm not going to lie to you. Not everything has been perfect or good or successes. There has been lots of lessons. For example, the Amara retreat was supposed to always be in Marrakesh, but due to an unequally yoked partnership, we decided to shift it and move it to different countries in Africa as opposed to staying in that one place. And so I've had the privilege since 2018 to November 2023 to have created these experiences in about 4 to 5 different countries on the continent of Africa, where I've been able to touch over 500 women's lives with the Amara retreat. And like I said, although I have had some amazing experiences, and I have met some remarkable women. This journey of entrepreneurship has not been fully roses. There's been so many hardships that have happened. And a lot of those hardships, like I said, have been because I didn't listen to the voice that was always guiding me. I allowed scarcity and lack and fear at times to be where I answered from as opposed to abundance and faith. On this channel, I want to discuss it all, from business, from why I left the Colored Girl, a community I founded, for why the Amara Retreat ended, from how something I created was put 100% in someone else's name, how I have dealt with multi six figures being extorted. Also, the beauty of partnering with large corporations. I've worked with companies such as Facebook or Meta, Instagram, Uber, Amazon, Lancome, Makeup Forever, L'Oreal. The list goes on. But also the lessons in those partnerships as well. I will discuss the loss of my first pregnancy. I will discuss marriage, my travel journeys, my interest, just whatever it is that I'm going through. I want to share that with you. And then I also want to talk to you about the lessons I've learned being off social media for 9+ months. And I probably won't get back on Instagram for a while. I'm going to show up here on YouTube. But those lessons that I've learned in disconnecting with everyone else and like reconnecting with self, I want to share it all. So this channel is my open journal. And if this is something that you're open to going on a journey with, I just ask that you subscribe, like, share, and tune in. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I am energized by this opportunity to just unveil it all, to just be raw, open, authentic, to allow God to use me, to allow my voice and my journey and my story to be shared. Thank you so much. I'll talk to y'all later.
Amaru, yeah.